if something isn't working well for a particular group, or if something is keeping out a particular group, inaccessible to a particular group, then it needs to be fixed.
Welcome to the Innovation Forge. In today's episode, I have visiting artisan Hayley Burke. Let's see how innovation meets artistry as we forge something extraordinary together.
You are listening to the Innovation Forge, the #1 podcast on adaptive enrollment management, exploring the data, marketing, and strategy that fuels higher education. Here's your host, David Dysart.
Hello, Guilders, and welcome to the very first visiting artisan of the Innovation Forge. I am your host, David Dysart, and I am thrilled that you are joining me on this journey into the innovative world of higher education and adaptive enrollment management. How do you create real change in education? What happens when innovation meets college admissions? In today's episode of the Innovation Forge, I sit down with Hayley Burke, a dedicated college counselor and former admissions professional, to explore how small ideas can lead to big transformations. From her eye-opening internship at Guantanamo Bay to pioneering more equitable admission practices, Hayley shares insights on innovation, efficiency, and supporting students in an ever-changing landscape. Plus, we dive into the role of Slate.org and talking about her experience in the student and counselor experience applying for college in our application forge. Before wrapping up with the Smith signature, 4 rapid-fire questions you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Hayley spent 5 years in the admission office at Pitzer, where I was lucky enough to work with her. She also kicked off a lot of years of hallway innovation. She now works as a college counselor at Santa Fe Prep in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hayley is a first-generation college student, which drives her motivation to help students experience the transformational power of college. In her free time, she likes to bake, ride horses, and dream about her next travel destination. Hi, Hayley. How are you doing today?
Hey, David, I'm doing super well. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, no, so excited for what is going to be the kind of inaugural episode of the Innovation Forge, so thank you so much for agreeing to do it.
Of course,
Now,
my first ever podcast.
oh, very excited as well to be your first podcast and vice versa. So thank you for coming. Before we do start talking about innovation, there is one more thing I wanted to talk about first. Now, you spent a couple of months living and working in Guantanamo Bay as an intern for the Department of Defense. What was that like, and how did it help shape your career and your perspectives?
Yeah, it's my go-to fun fact. So when I was chosen to intern in Guantanamo Bay, I was a junior in college, and I came from a women's college, Bryn Mawr, outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I moved to Guantanamo Bay for the summer. And those two places are extraordinarily different. Women's college to a military base where the male to female ratio was 17-1. So it was a pretty impactful life experience, I would say. And prior to living there, I thought that I wanted to go into the military to be a social worker. That was sort of my goal in college and what I was working towards. I thought this internship would be a great way to try out what that might feel like. And when I arrived, I very quickly realized that I am not cut out to live on a military base. I still think social workers in the military are doing really important work, and I certainly support it. But for me personally, I don't think I could live there for more than a month or two, but it was really impactful in helping me figure out what I didn't want to do, which is why I always tell my students that even if a internship goes utterly terribly wrong, figuring out what you don't like is just as important as figuring out what you do like.
Oh, completely agree. And it's setting aside possible issues with the intern system in America, being able to explore options and career paths is extremely helpful. And the soft skills you develop there, also super great. But yeah, it seems like social work in itself is a very rigorous, demanding profession. So I imagine also doing that on a military base adds a lot of layers of complexity. So glad
Certainly.
you were able to get that internship experience before you dived fully into it.
Exactly. Might as well figure that out ahead of time, right?
Totally. So getting into the kind of innovation portion of our podcast interview, when we both worked at Pitzer, we had a great culture of, I mentioned it earlier, hallway innovation. It was definitely one of my favorite parts of working there, where these conversations just turned into these random projects. And I always really appreciated you advocating for projects, both with the admission side of the house, but also participating and fueling these projects. Can you talk about what kind of drives you to keep innovating and how that shaped your projects and your approach to work?
Yeah, I think the hallway innovation was also one of my favorite parts of the job. And the fact that everyone was always really on board with new ideas. It never seemed like people were trying to put the brakes on us. It was always, hey, if you can make this better, why not? Right? And I think that is what drives me is this desire to pursue efficiency. I'm really someone who, when I see systems that I determine are not working or aren't working well or could be better, that's a huge driver for me to say, what can I do to make them better? Am I in a position to make this more efficient? So efficiency is definitely one of them. And then I think another element is equity and justice. I'm very driven by the idea that if something isn't working well for a particular group, or if something is keeping out a particular group, inaccessible to a particular group, then it needs to be fixed. And so it was really I think a great mental practice to like stretch your brain to think, how is what we're doing in the admission office at Pitzer and, in other situations in life, how is what we're doing working well for specific people? And maybe who is it not working well for? Or what constituent groups are we not thinking about serving with what we're doing and the innovation that we're making? So those are my main motivations. And I think that made it really fun, and it made it fun to come to work because it felt like every day could be something new or could stretch our brains in a different way.
Yeah, and I think you did such a wonderful job in both pushing the innovation culture, but those particular projects. And like you said, with accessibility, especially with all the kind of headwinds we're facing as an industry, let's say, right now, I think that it's more important than ever that people are able to start taking that mindful approach to help students in the process. So what were some of the key lessons you learned from tackling these experimental ideas, and how did they prepare you for your next venture?
Yeah. So Pitzer was my first job out of grad school. And I think the culture at Pitzer in the Office of Admission was really, really gung-ho towards innovation and making change. It was often said that because we were a young college, we could be like a petri dish and really try out things. And we weren't sort of steeped in this historical way of doing things. And I really appreciated that about my first job, having that landscape be what kind of shaped me as a professional. However, I fully did not understand that that was not normal. I feel incredibly spoiled now that I left Pitzer and that yeah, that environment, because what I've learned transitioning here to the high school side at Santa Fe Prep is that the Office of Admission, the culture at Pitzer was very unique in that innovation and changing things and being creative was so supported. I think oftentimes when maybe you leave an environment like that and you go elsewhere, you learn that other places have a little bit more reticence toward making changes or innovating, especially if there's sort of an old guard present where folks have said, hey, this has been working for us in the past. Why would we change it? Or seems like more trouble than it's worth to, innovate this, or I don't really understand why that's necessary or helpful. So I definitely have learned to appreciate a culture of innovation and to realize when you don't necessarily have that support around you, how to go about trying to create those changes in a way that folks can accept and don't feel are scary. And, we hear often like when you're new to a job, you should wait for a little bit to kind of understand the culture of where you're at, watch and learn for the first year, and then kind of jump into maybe making some changes or updates in the second year. It's just never been my style because I didn't grow up professionally that way. But I've certainly had to learn to walk the line between looking, listening, learning, and coming in guns blazing, ready to, make changes that I think are necessary because sometimes things are in place because of reasons that you don't understand yet.
Yeah, but you'll learn those reasons as you do push those barriers.
Yes, people will tell you.
They will not be shy about telling you. That is definitely the case.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So shifting from the higher ed space to the high school setting is definitely a huge leap. what prompted you to make that move, and how has your experience in college admissions and your innovative mindset influenced your approach now that you are at the high school side of the table?
Yeah. So, college admission, you get to be a part of a student's story for 20 minutes. The time that it takes you to read an application and then perhaps, advocating, yeah, for them and committee space. And maybe you get to meet them on admitted student day, right? But for the most part, it's really a snapshot experience that I felt I got to know these students in a very small way, and was a part of their journey in a very small way. Moving to college counseling, that becomes much more impactful. You get to be a bigger part of their journey for a longer period of time, all the way from junior year to when they graduate, right? And it feels like such a privilege to be a part of this really transformational time in their lives. I was just thinking about this yesterday, like the implicit trust that they have in me, that I have their back and that I know what I'm talking about. They would much rather press submit on their application sitting next to me on my couch than at home with their parents or by themselves. In fact, when I try to suggest they go home and do it with their parents so their parents can share with them in this experience, they're like, Hayley, why would I do that? I'm going to do it with you. So that a level of trust is really beautiful. And the lows are lower in college counseling, I will say, because in college admission, when you say no to someone, it hurts for sure, but it's sort of a temporary hurt because you have to move on. But in college counseling, you really see how much effort students are putting in, and when they get those denied decisions, it can be really tough. But on the other hand, the highs are also higher, right? Like, I don't know of any other profession that would involve a teenager like running screaming into your office to tell you the good news that they just received. And knowing that you had a little bit of a part in that and knowing how excited they are to have this experience at one of their top choice schools, it's just so lovely. And it bolsters me even at the hardest times when I'm working late into the night or over winter break. When I get that good news, like that's what really keeps me driving forward.
Yeah, you're definitely establishing such a deeping, meaningful connection and relationship with these students by building out the application, by preparing for college. And some of that probably is also just the Hayley Burkeness of it, of you're also really a wonderful partner in those kinds of projects. So
Oh,
glad
thank
that you have a couch for them to hit submit on.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. And I think I forgot to maybe answer the second part of your question just about, innovation or taking what you know from admission into this field. And really, I have found really strong reasons why college counselors should work in college admission prior to working in college counseling, right? There's this level of what's happening behind the curtain in college admission that is fully and completely unknown to anyone outside of the profession. And you can do your best to sort of guess what's going on, but unless you've actually been in college admission, it's very hard to demystify that for students and families. So now that I'm here, there's things that are even just incredibly basic that I know how to guide my students to do, right? The fact that if you send an email to a college admission office, it will be added as a note in your file, right, at the end of your admission file in the slate reader, that would not be known to anyone who hasn't worked in admission. And so I can instruct them about how to send a quick update to the college and how to get that known when their application is being read. And I can instruct them on the importance of demonstrated interest for certain colleges, how to show demonstrated interest, right? How to make sure that that's being tracked. And so there's all of these elements that are very, I think sort of they have an element of mystique about the college admission process that I can just completely push out of the way and clarify for my families. And I have found that that really helps to build the trust and belief in my expertise as well.
Oh, yeah. And I remember at Pitzer, we put a public facing webpage together that was talking about demonstrated interest because, yeah, there are a lot of people in that college going process who don't know that this is something that a lot of colleges are tracking. Now, not every college tracks it the same way or puts the same resources or weights on it or the individual behaviors. But yeah, there are a lot of elements of the application process and college going that just you don't know unless you're kind of peeking behind the curtain and seeing how Oz is running the big machine. But also, I think working at Pitzer in a selective liberal arts college atmosphere gave you even more additional information that maybe working for a open enrollment or some one of those kinds of colleges, you're not seeing that those additional layers. So I'm glad that you're able to bring that knowledge to your students. That's a wonderful asset to have for their journey.
Yeah. And so many, important parts of our experiences working at Pitzer involved wearing a bunch of hats. And I think there was times in which that felt somewhat chaotic, right? Like, okay, I run the tour guide program, but I also do this and, this other thing over here. At the same time, I have now learned that that sort of style was not very common at other colleges where folks had a deep knowledge of slate or a deep knowledge of comms. It was very siloed within certain people's expertise. And so the fact that I could come into a situation and know a medium amount about a lot of things was pretty unique and has allowed me to be even more helpful as a college counselor because I do know more than just the very basics of reading, recruitment, yield.
Wearing a lot of hats, really good professional development, can be stressful, but you do understand the process at such a deeper level. And it also allows you to make those connections. Genius aspect of being able to have those medium levels of inputs on several different things allows you to see those connections and make these kinds of developmental projects that you're not going to know if you are siloed just in events or just in slate. So that I think definitely helped propel your innovation because you were able to see how these different systems and these different processes connected.
Absolutely.
The last big topic we wanted to hit on here was slate.org. You've been incorporating slate.org into your new environment at Santa Fe Prep. For listeners who might be less familiar, slate.org is a platform that helps high schools, colleges, and students connect more seamlessly. Can you tell us how you are using slate.org at your high school?
Yeah. Before I came into my school, which was about 3.5 years ago, I don't believe that slate.org was in use or not in frequent use, I should say. And it's becoming more and more popular for colleges to join slate.org, which, shameless plug, please, everybody, join slate.org. As far as I understand, it's not a big push from the college side, and it's so, so helpful on the high school side. So what I do is starting in the fall, usually around the first deadline, so October 15th, I start checking slate.org every day. And what it shows you is a list of your students who are connected to your high school, the schools that they have applied to that connect with slate.org. So it's not all of them, but it's a good amount, I would say, maybe like 2/3. And then their status, like what bucket they're in at the school. So what's super helpful for me is to use it in two different ways. When a student shows as awaiting materials, I can go in and make sure that I did in fact send those materials. And we use SCORE as the college counseling software here at Prep. So I go into SCORE, make sure I did in fact send it. Sometimes I haven't because the student forgot to notify me via moving their college in SCORE to the applied column that they were in fact applying to that school. So that's the second way that I use it, is to actually learn that a student has applied to a place. Teenagers are notoriously bad at sharing information. Communication, not a skill. Even with their college counselor, I think their parents often feel like they're in the dark, but I have to tell parents that it's not just them. Students also forget to tell me when they've applied someplace, if they've been admitted someplace, right? It just over their heads. So slate.org can be really helpful to determine if they've applied, if they're missing any materials, and then specifically what materials they are missing. Because sometimes when they actually check their portal, it's not as clear what material type they're missing. It could say just transcript, for example. And if I go into slate.org, I can see more detail and know, oh, for whatever reason, this college is showing that they're missing their mid-year transcript, even though it's November. So that's not something that the student needs to worry about right now. And then I can assuage the fear that the student is missing something. And then when you do see that a student is missing something, if it is in fact something that you need to send off to the college right then, you actually can direct upload on slate.org, which is kind of a game changer. And from what I understand, it goes straight into the system at the college. Maybe there, I don't know if there's some sort of filter, or if it just gets uploaded direct to their file, but it feels pretty direct to me that if we're missing a letter of recommendation, for example, I can just plop it right in there instead of sending it again via score and then not knowing if something is sort of getting lost in a gray area between score and the college, because sometimes that does happen, especially if a college has duplicate files or profiles for a student, say if they have a nickname or something like that. So basically, it eliminates the middleman. It allows me to help to understand where students are at and what they're up to, and just to keep my organization much more on point.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. The last few years, there's been so many more conversations while at like Slate Summit or just in the community where people are interested in slate.org or they're starting to roll it out. And yeah, the lift to value of slate.org is wonderful. It's the biggest, I think, hurdle to implementing it on the college side is really just the policy aspect of, do we want to share decisions? Do you want to allow students to opt in or opt out of having their counselor have this information? The actual technical side of implementing it, so far below the impact of what the counselor side will be, the student side will be, and the college side will be, for all the reasons you spoke to. And we did kind of touch on this a little bit, but have you noticed any tangible results so far, like a smoother process, quicker turnarounds, or better support for students making their decisions?
Yeah, for sure. I think, another great reason colleges should implement this is like, let me bother you less, right? Because if a student, shows that they're missing all of their materials, but I know that I sent it, and a school doesn't use slate.org, then I'm going to have to call up the admission office and say, I think you need to dedupe something or go digging for something. And that just takes valuable time away from my day, honestly, and from the day of whoever on the ops team has to answer my phone call. So I would say just efficiency and speed is definitely a benefit. And then a secondary benefit that I didn't touch upon earlier is knowing decisions. I get access to a student's decisions on slate.org if slate.org has allowed for that to happen, right? Because I do think there's a way to say that counselors can upload materials, but maybe not be privy to decisions on slate.org.
Yeah.
And so I get decisions for maybe like 50% of my students. And it's only after they've opened their decision that I have access to it. So I'm not sort of ruining anything accidentally by surprising them. But at the same time, it's super helpful for me to know that decision and then to know what kind of emotions I'm going to get that day from this student, right? If it's a deny decision, almost like a counselor call, I can get a little bit of a heads up and then I can just better prepare myself to talk with this student about next steps or to, give them a hug and a snack if they're feeling really crummy. And if it's an admit decision, then I know that I can kind of give them a look in the dining hall and invite them to share with me that decision, right? So it really does prepare me to have those conversations following a decision when I know before the student comes to tell me in person. It just prepares me better.
Yeah, and I remember right before we implemented slate.org at Pitzer, I had built a mailing to counselors that like, oh, okay, here's the list of your students and here's what they're missing. And then we did slate.org. I'm like, oh, this was so much easier than figuring out the for loop dictionary, configurable joins, this and that. I'm like, oh, should have just started with slate.org. This would have been so much better.
Yeah, it's been a huge, huge benefit for me. In fact, it just lives as a tab on my computer between October and April. I check it daily. It sort of feels like the thing I do in the morning to, look at today's news. It's kind of like today's news. So I'm certainly a big fan of slate.org and have used it quite a bit in my office. And it's sort of funny that students are not even really privy to it, right? It's not something that they have necessarily on their minds, but it's been a huge benefit for me as a counselor and also very low barrier to entry for me, right? It's something that I
Yeah.
refresh and check daily. But it's easy to do. The sign up was simple, and it definitely streamlines a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, low barrier until I like am emailing you and calling you like, hey, what does this look like on your site now? I can't see what the counselor site is. Can you check real quick? I'll put a
I
test record in. It's fine.
I love to do that. So keep calling.
No, thank you so much for sharing those insights on those topics. I'm glad we could also share them with the community. While you're here, though, I'd like to get your thoughts on another question for one of our segments, the Application Forge. This is a spotlight on elements that go into crafting a dynamic, student-centered application experience. It feels like, especially recently, colleges are doing a lot trying to change the student experience, whether that's streamlining things, being more fun or kitschy about it, or just a dozen other approaches to augment the process. Being on the high school side now, what are you seeing that is working and maybe doesn't work so much?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I think
There's
as
a lot
a
of weight in
college
that, yeah.
counselor, I know. I think as a college counselor, I am mostly approached by students when things aren't working well or when things are causing stress, right? Um, so maybe I'll start with that just because that's a little bit more top of mind. So I think two things that maybe cause undue stress that perhaps colleges aren't aware of is one, trying to be fun or kitschy or niche. So I'll give an example. Some colleges have now moved to, in addition, it never feels like instead, it's always an addition to their supplemental essays. They have, say, 10 short answer questions where you kind of fill in a blank or you make lists and things like that. And I swear to you, the students find that far more stressful than they find writing an essay because they overthink it so bad. You can ask them what their favorite restaurant is, or if they were to open up a food truck, what sort of food it would serve, or, the song that defines their life. And they just mull over it for far too long. And it's also sort of the one thing that I can't guide them on, right? I can't really help them brainstorm for that because it just exists in their own brain. So I would say those types of questions, I do understand that colleges are trying to be fun, trying to assess personality, trying to get little tidbits that tell them something about the student. It's not fun for them and it's not fun for me. And they prefer just a standard essay. So maybe colleges take that how you will. And then the second piece of where I see colleges trying to be, I think, more niche or sort of forming this process in a way that feels more authentic to them is when colleges embark on their own application portal and process and have that be the singular way that students can apply, meaning that students are not able to use the Common App to apply to that school. There are a couple in particular places that come to mind. I'm sure other college counselors can envision them, but for whatever reason, it happens to be that the user experience on these applications that are school-specific applications are atrocious. And there's always something that's gone wrong. And I always have to learn these new systems, right? It's not enough for me to know Common App. I also have to know the UC system. I also have to know the Cal State system. I also have to know UNM, Georgetown, MIT, right? So it's adding to our plate. There's so many little pieces that are maybe just something a little bit different, something a little off. And I don't always know how to college counsel my students in those moments until I actually go in there and play around and try to figure it out. And I'm somebody with a 28 junior caseload. Right? If we're thinking about our public school colleagues that have 800 student caseloads, there's just no time in the day to do that. So that piece for me is something that I wish colleges would rethink, the sort of utility of efficacy, really equity when it comes to making your own application and kind of forcing students to go down that route instead of maybe hopping onto the Common App, which I think over many decades has sort of perfected, maybe not perfected, that's a little too strong, but has enhanced the user experience to the point where it's much more straightforward.
And yeah, there's so much that goes into it, whether it's the test development, front end user experience, especially as a lot of students are doing it on their phone nowadays. So unless you're really unless you're able to have the time and expertise to optimize it for the phone and desktop and tablet, there are so many really strong potential pitfalls that you're going to leave these students in the lurch. And like you said, the people in their life who are trying to help them with the application, who don't have time to learn how to become an expert in this system, just to try to help them with these pieces that aren't functioning as everyone would hope though they would function.
Yeah.
But
I actually, just for a fun example, I will not name names, but we have students apply to some places. We require an application to some institutions. And one application, which is an in-house application, has a character limit for the box in which students are supposed to list their senior year courses. The character limit, it's 256 characters, and there is no indication that there is a character limit. There is no note, there is no asterisk, there is no nothing. So if you overshoot the character limit, it pops up with an error that's just a bunch of code. You can't actually tell what the error is. And so only through so much trial and error did I find that there's a character limit to this specific box, and it's not even long enough for them to list all of the information that the box tells them is required, which is the name of the class, the credits, and the length of the class. So
yeah, one class is about
silly
250 characters, I imagine.
Yeah. And like our
Wow.
class, we have a class called, honors, capitalism, culture, and the environment. And that's basically taken up the whole space. So just things like that. And I've actually reached out to that college and let them know that this is a really poor experience for students. And if they want students to be able to apply to their institution easily and efficiently, that they should really look into that. And I never hear anything back. And I make this suggestion yearly. So I don't know if, maybe it's not a priority, but seeing how easily students will give up on something if it's not simple and straightforward, which is fair, right? We do the same as adults. And I don't blame them for it, but colleges are going to lose out.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important element that you're hitting on, just the frictionless experience that high school students, college students, adults have when accessing any other company, organization, website. Really trains us to just be like, oh, okay, this didn't work, so I guess I'll just not do this particular college application. I have 10 other applications I've already completed, so what's one less?
Exactly. They'll default to, the easiest. But to maybe highlight just one thing that I think is really working well, and some like a trend that I've maybe seen kind of pop up more recently, is that more and more colleges are CCing college counselors on, say, missing materials emails or emails about special scholarships that students might qualify for. So it'll be, send to student A and then CC college counselor based upon the counselor, I'm presuming, that was listed in the Common App. And that is so, so handy for me. Again, a smaller operation here. I get that might be overwhelming for college counselors with larger caseloads. So I'm not sure what the balance could be there. But when you CC me on a scholarship opportunity that one of my students is particularly eligible for, I can then go talk to that student and say, hey, I got that email. Are you going to follow up with that scholarship opportunity? And it allows me to have just the knowledge and awareness of what's going on and the ability to actually follow up and do whatever action items need to take place. So I do think that would work in sort of to benefit the college too, just because if they're emailing about something urgent, then I can go fix whatever is urgent, right? So that's an innovation that I've seen. I know, like in particular, Barnard does that, and I have found that incredibly helpful. And I would love if more colleges maybe looked into ways to do that, or some sort of other form of that to continue keeping counselors in the loop, even after students have applied.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get a suitcase out when this podcast episode goes out about emailing student counselors, whether it's missing materials, or I know we used to at Pitzer also do, if we were coming like a high school visit, we would list all the students that we had in our system that were kind of in that cycle, so that the counselor could also tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, this college is coming. They mentioned that you were interested. Or if there is someone at the school that the counselor knows we would be a good fit for, but aren't in our system, they can again go reach out to that student.
Yeah, just like that. Super, super helpful for us to be in the loop, even if we don't have the capacity to do something about it and, end up deleting that email. The fact that it's sort of in the back of our minds now, I think is really critical. And what I would love if more colleges could get on board with that. At least the perspective of one college counselor is that it's not bothersome and it doesn't clog my inbox. It helps me stay on top of opportunities for my students. And I think that is, one of the most critical elements of my job is to be on top of that.
Fantastic. So we have time for another segment. It's our last segment. It's the Smith signature. A lot of great takeaways here already, but before we wrap, every artisan leaves their mark. So I'll ask you a few quick questions so you can stamp your personal hallmark on today's conversation.
Okay.
So what's one tool, digital or otherwise, that you rely on daily to keep your work running smoothly?
Yeah. This one's a little boring, so apologies, but I think I use it in a novel way. I live and die by my Google Calendar. I don't know how any of my students exist without Google Calendar. They don't use it. They somehow keep it all in their brain. My brain doesn't work like that. So I think I use my calendar in some novel ways because in addition to just my daily meetings, I also try to keep myself sort of engaged with task management, things that happen every year around the same time of year. I will put annually on my calendar. Today is the day to start building the Google form for RSVPing for this particular event. Today is the day to send out the Google form to parents, right? And that happens annually on my calendar. And for me, that's been the most effective way to remind myself to look ahead and when things need to happen, scaffolded for events down the road or projects that are long term.
I 100% fully endorse this usage of calendar. I feel like Christina Kelpie, a former colleague that we both had who will be on a future episode, was one of those people who could just knew like, oh yeah, it's March 13th, so I'm going to do these 3 things. I'm like, no, my brain will never have that knowledge to just self alarm clock that I had to do these 3 things. So the ability
No.
to have those nudges is so incredible.
Oh, absolutely. And like the triage effect where if you just like get into it during the day, you're just going to answer your email and do whatever is coming up the next day. But to look down the road is sort of a privilege, I think. And like my brain does not
Mhm.
operate that way. So I have to force it to look far ahead. And I think at this point, Google Calendar is the way that I figured out how to do that best. So highly recommend trying that out if you, like me, are struggling to think about long-term projects and scaffold them.
Yeah, fully endorsed by me. So that's 2 people telling you that it's wonderful. So next question, what's a recent trend, technology, or practice that you think will shape the future of higher education admissions?
Yeah. So what I'm noticing within my students is that for them, college research is really, really tough to learn about colleges. And this is sort of like ships in the night effect because I feel like a college's main goal is to put out information about themselves and to help students explore more about this school. And the students are like, I don't know what to do to find this information. So we're kind of operating like this. And what I have found is that for a while, the virtual visits that arose post-COVID, during COVID, were a really useful, equitable way for students to explore. These days, students don't trust the virtual visits so much. They're not so engaged by them. That feels like sort of benign propaganda to the students. My students, are much more invested in the day in a life videos that they either find on YouTube in long form or on TikTok, or even on the admission office's social media accounts. They're still decently trusting of those, even though they're put out by admission. But I think this style of, finding your average student, having them do a day in a life to really try to promote this idea of like an unbiased take on what the school is all about and what being a student there would feel like. My students are responding best to that form of research, that form of marketing. And so I really recommend that schools kind of look more in that direction. How can you capitalize on that kind of form? What does it look like? How are you maybe trying to link up your social media that's school sponsored with these day in a life videos. But I highly recommend schools go in that direction because that's the most effective form that my students have reported on.
Yeah, the peer-driven communications and just being able to convey what the actual experience is on the campus. You're going to get a lot more trust. You're going to get such a stronger connection with someone who is in a similar life role and is going through the experiences that you're planning on going through in a couple of years. So that's, I think, again, such a really great element to highlight. So thank you. Now, if you were starting your career today, what one piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, sort of reflecting back on something we talked about earlier, but I would say not everyone is going to be as excited about innovation as you and David. Like, it's valuable to understand that even if you are currently in a place where innovation and change is really well supported, that's probably not going to be the reality for the rest of your career, right? So trying to find out how you can keep your cup full and continue to innovate and make change, but also understanding that you might feel some pushback from an institution because change is scary or the status quo is easy, right? I definitely had sort of a rude awakening, I think, when I left Pitzer and experienced that for the first time. So I wish I had been sort of better prepared to know that future employers or future employment landscapes would not be nearly as sort of blank check towards innovation as Pitzer was, which I'm incredibly grateful for.
Yeah, really appreciated all the autonomy that we had at Pitzer and the encouragement and the culture there that we could really use to innovate. And if you could change one thing today about the way institutions find, enroll, and support students, what would that be?
Yeah. Email is dead, guys. And I know that we've been talking about this since the Pitzer times, but I also remember and recall how many hours we spent crafting columns and probably do spend crafting columns and things like that. And I hate to say that it's sort of a waste because it's not entirely, but my students receive hundreds of emails from colleges a day. Hundreds. And they are missing critical emails because their emails are buried with other emails. And it could be like a marketing email from a school and an email about missing materials come within minutes of each other. And then they just get buried. So I don't know what the solution is to this. I have to admit, I don't come with any grand plans for the future, but I do know that communicating with students via email is not working effectively for my families because they already have too much happening in their inbox and because I think they turn off their email brains at some point, right? It's like the inbox is becoming clogged and they just don't want to deal with that. And so they start to have a sort of ignoring kind of approach to it. And so I think I would really urge colleges to think about other ways to convey really critical information and keeping marketing emails to a limit. I've had more students than ever this year tell me when I suggest a college, oh no, I would never consider X college. They are so annoying and send me emails daily. So
Cool.
it's also working against the ultimate goal of, matriculating or attracting students when students have said to me that the single reason they wouldn't consider a school is because their marketing is too frequent.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of great research being done about if you are sending email, kind of more reasonable timing and frequency, because anyone who sends me an email daily, I'm not going to see. I'm just going to completely become blind to those emails in my inbox.
Yeah, and the CCing parents and CCing counselor, to me, that feels like really low-hanging fruit. But I had a situation this year where my student was showing that he was missing his transcript, but I had sent it multiple times, but it was still showing as not received. And it was only the student receiving emails about this missing material, no parent, no counselor. And eventually, after literally a month of me uploading to slate.org, sending through score, I called the admission office and I just said, what is up here? And they said, oh, we just don't accept that transcript because it has passes on it. And we want to see the grades underneath the pass. And I was like, oh, it's just pass. There's no
Fun
grades
fact.
underneath the pass. But all of that, they were just marking it as not received because they weren't accepting it. But in no place was that clear. It wasn't being communicated with me. It wasn't being communicated with the student or the parents. And it was months of back and forth before I was able to figure that out. It was a ginormous waste of time for everyone involved, right? And so I still feel, even if there's, something that I still need to call to fix, CCing, adding counselors and parents onto an email would be a fantastic first step to make sure everyone's in the loop and materials are being received and important information is being communicated.
Yeah, and I will say, as a quick note for the Slate folks who are building those CC emails, if you do CC additional people and they unsubscribe, because there is an unsubscribe option in that email, they will unsubscribe the student themselves. So you can build a secondary mailing that goes to those concerted parties, parents, counselors, or if it's an email that does not have an unsubscribe, just as a quick note to those folks who are looking to add those. Again, a very important element, because as you do start looping in people who do care about the student's journey and who are invested, it might catch their eyes when it doesn't catch the student's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, wonderful response. Now, I did not send this question ahead of time, but if there are any last minute thoughts you have on innovation that you'd like to share, this would be a great time.
Ooh, last minute thoughts on innovation. I think I just want to encourage people who may be in a setting where it seems like innovation is not a core value of an institution, or like I said, it's sort of scary. People are reticent about it. I want to encourage those people to keep pushing, keep trying, keep aspiring to make even small incremental change at the beginning, right? I went from us kind of changing the world, it felt like, at Pitzer, and just crafting all of these amazing new things, to my job currently, where I had to take a sort of wait and see approach and work on a smaller scale to make change. And both of those approaches are really valuable, but I also know how it feels to go from feeling like the world is your oyster to feeling like, this might be harder to get the fulfillment of innovation and making processes more efficient and equitable, because other people don't feel the same way that I do about it, right? And yet over time, these last 4 years in my current position, I have been able to sort of build in a stronger culture of innovation in my office that perhaps didn't exist as much before. It just took a little bit more time and effort, but I want people to know they're not alone. And if they're experiencing maybe some pushback or just disappointment around a lack of innovative culture, I have felt that way too, and I'm happy to commiserate with you, but also here saying, keep going.
Yeah, and like you said, when there isn't that culture already established, the change management of moving the culture in that direction does definitely take time, and building your kind of political capital with success also takes time. So those little wins where you're starting to demonstrate, oh, change doesn't have to be scary. You are a competent person who will make changes that will benefit the students, the staff, the entire experience is really important.
Yeah.
But it's a little Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill for a while to really establish that culture.
But when you see how well the students react as well, and how the students feel way more supported when you are thinking about how to optimize their experience or just make them feel like you care about if things are hard or confusing for them, I mean, that makes it all very clear that it's worth it too.
100%. Well, fantastic. Those were all such great pieces that really resonated with me, and I'm sure definitely the listeners as well. I also really loved our chat today. Is there anything else you'd like the listeners to know?
So for our college side listeners out there, I know that a chunk of you have counselor advisory boards, and I think that is a really fantastic practice. I think more colleges should start those up, just because there's so much about the process for college admission that impacts students, that speaking from personal experience on the admission side, we never saw and might never think about, right? Because our brains are just in a different place. So now that I'm a college counselor and now that I feel like I have a real pulse on what works and what doesn't for students and for counselors as well, for both of these constituent groups, I really am a big fan of those advisory boards. I think colleges should look into, crafting those if you don't have one, and if you do have one and need someone to be on one and want some geographic diversity from New Mexico, what? I'm your girl, so feel free to reach out. I love trying to help make things work better for people just in general. So would love to be considered.
Yeah, and I would also love to give Hayley a really endorsing plug there as well. Like I said, she was so helpful while we were at Pitzer. I would bug her all the time, even after she abandoned us for the high school side. But her perspective, both from the college admission and the high school side, and her really innovative mindset that is geared towards making the student and staff life better, really allows her to bring a perspective that is immensely helpful.
Oh, thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Of course. And if the listeners did want to reach out about the advisory boards or just connect with you about what you talked about today, where is the best place to message you? I'll be sure to add that to the notes.
Yeah, feel free to shoot me an email, hburke@sfprep.org, or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you are planning on visiting New Mexico or Santa Fe, it's a popular destination, and need some food or fun recommendations, I have an entire Google Doc that I send out to our reps who visit us every year for experiencing Santa Fe the best possible way. So I'm also happy just to talk about New Mexico.
No, I loved at Pitzer. That was a Google sheet that would float around of just food recommendations for all the different places in the country. It was like, oh, I'm going to go to a conference I've never been to before. Let me pull up the Google Doc to see where the best food places are at.
Yes. A thing about Pitzer was that we loved our food.
I don't think that was just Pitzer. I think that I'm getting the sense that that's kind of an admissions thing.
Admission folks have very strong opinions about food and dining, I think. And I'm very happy to have sort of carried that over into the college counseling realm, where I now just hand folks a packet and say, don't bother trying to find your own places to eat. These have been pre-vetted. Here you go.
It's a tailored Yelp recommendation. Probably shouldn't say Yelp. This is not a recommendation for Yelp. I'm not being paid yet to endorse Yelp.
Maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future. You know what? Contact me. Reach out to me. We'll figure something out. But it was so great catching up with you, Hayley. This was a wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and insights with us. Your journey and your expertise have given us a lot to think about. And again, I know our listeners will take plenty of valuable ideas from this. Thank you again for joining in the show.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. It was really a pleasure to be here and to be your first guest. I really appreciate it.
There is no one else I would want to be the inaugural guest on the Innovation Forge than you.
Thanks.
This is the Blueprint Breakdowns, your quick reference guide after a dense discussion or deep dive chapter. Here, we extract the essentials, highlighting key points, and help you carry clear takeaways back to your daily work. No guesswork needed. That was a wonderful conversation with Hayley Burke, and she just texted me the other day about getting into Denison's Counselor Advisory Board. So definitely reach out to her before her dance card fills up. Now, let's break down that interview. What are the key takeaways from today's conversation with Hayley? First, innovation in education starts with a mindset. Hayley shared how her experience at Pitzer College shaped her approach to challenging the status quo and pushing for efficiency, equity, and accessibility in admissions. If you're working in an institution that resists change, start small, build credibility, and find ways to make meaningful improvements over time. This is a reoccurring theme in the conversations I've had with other guests. There's a lot of truth here. Second, the shift from college admissions to counseling revealed a deeper impact. While working in admissions meant brief interactions with students, counseling allows for long-term mentorship and guidance. The trust students place in their counselors highlights the importance of demystifying the application process and supporting them through both success and setbacks. Next, Slate.org is a game changer for high school counselors. Hayley emphasized how this tool streamlines the process, reducing delays in application materials and providing real-time updates on student decisions. Colleges, take note. Implementing Slate.org can improve communication and reduce unnecessary back and forths with counselors. And finally, colleges need to rethink their communication strategies. Students are overwhelmed by emails. Too many marketing messages can actually push them away. Instead, peer-driven content like day-in-the-life videos and better direct outreach to counselors and families can create a more engaging and effective experience. So what's the blueprint? Innovate with purpose, advocate for students, and rethink how we can support them through the college process. That's the breakdown. For those watching the video or willing to see this cute little guy, I need a name for my joins juggling octopus for our segment, The Consultant Cadre. Send me an email at theinnovationforgepodcast@gmail.com or find me on the socials like LinkedIn and Instagram to comment your suggestion. I'm also really happy with the Easter eggs in this design. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. I'll send the ebook of my book, The Innovation Forge, to all winning name submitters. If you enjoyed today's episode, please grow the guild by rating and reviewing The Innovation Forge or sharing it with a colleague who needs to hear about these creative crossovers in education. The best review or comment every month will get an ebook copy of my book. Particularly great ones will also get featured on future episodes. Thanks so much for joining me in the workshop today. Remember to strike true and let's forge something extraordinary together.